Welcome to part 11 in our series of videos on creating a purchase order system using Blazor and C#. I thought we'd just do a quick recap on where we are and what is coming up in this part. The target for our purchase order import form is this, and it consists of a header and a detail section. This is the purchase order lines. So far we've produced this, which is the header, which looks fairly similar to what we want, but we've yet to add the bottom part, i.e. the order lines. And if we look at that, we can see we're going to have a Syncfusion grid with product description, quantity, unit price, net total, tax rate, tax, and the total. Now, of these at present, only description, unit price, quantity, and tax rate are defined in the PO line model class. Product code and description and unit price will be derived from the product drop-down list, and similarly tax rate will be derived from the tax rate drop-down list. For the Syncfusion grids, we will need to add the missing items to the model, and these are product code, net total, tax amount, and line total. Now, it's important to realize that these are only being added to the model class. They won't be added to the SQL table. And another slight peculiarity is that we won't be saving the tax ID in the purchase order line database table. It would normally be more conventional to save the tax ID rather than the tax rate. But by saving the tax rate, it would allow the same tax rate to be changed in future without historic purchase order lines being recalculated with the current tax rate. I've had personal example of this. At the moment, in the UK, the standard VAT rate is 20%, but in the past it's been 17.5%, 15%, 10%, it was even 8%. And if we just store the tax ID and we go into the tax rate table and change the tax percentage for a particular rate, it will calculate all outstanding or existing or historic records. So I want to avoid that. Anyway, having had that brief introduction, let's now have a look at the code. This is the purchase order line model as we've got it at the moment, and we want to add the additional columns for product code, net total, tax amount, and line total. And to save you watching me type, I've got a revised model which I can just replace the existing one with, and it is basically exactly the same, except we've got these additional fields down at the bottom. The only thing that I would make a comment on now is that I did have quite a few problems with the purchase order lines grid and the dialog to input the data, and please note that there's a question mark after decimal to allow nulls in here. Without that, I did run into a few difficulties. Fine, so that's that. So I'll save that. And if we now look at the purchase order page itself, this is the code we've got at the moment. So it consists of an edit model, and at the top here, we've got the drop-down list, etc., for the supplier address and other bits of information like who ordered it, order number, date, and so on. What we now want to add is a Syncfusion grid to hold the purchase order lines. So I'm just going to insert one here, and again, to save you watching me type this out, I've got it pre-done, and this is the very basic. So this is just a definition of a grid, giving it a reference of order lines grid. The data source is going to be order lines. It's got some toolbar items, and there's going to be a toolbar click event, so we can open a dialog. So we need to define these extra bits and pieces here. So the first thing we need to do is at the start of the code, we want to put in here the definition for these. So we want, so I'll put it under here. I thought I'd got some code for this, but I don't think I have. No, I haven't, so I'll just type it in. Right, so that should be all right. Order lines. We need to define the toolbar items. And that goes in the onInitialize sync. So here we are. So we'll put them under here. And as you can see, you don't want to watch me type. So hopefully I've got some code here that'll save us doing that. So this consists of the normal toolbar items, add, edit and delete with their tooltips and their icons. I did consider changing this text to say add order line, edit order line, delete order line, but it looked a bit messy. So I've just left these as add, edit and delete. And we need a method to handle the toolbar click. So we'll put that at the bottom here. So what that is doing is when the user clicks on the toolbar, add, we're going to put some code in here, edit, we're going to put some code in there, and delete, we're going to put code in there. So those are just placeholders for the moment. Now I think if we run it, what we have got one error. What have we got here? Probably a mistyping somewhere. Line 104. Right, save that. No errors apparently. Let's run it. All we've done at this point is just put in the very basic grid. So this is the list of purchase orders, and it's pretty meaningless at the moment. But if we look at add, here's our header that we've got before, but now we've got our grid with add, edit and delete, none of which do anything, and our grid doesn't look very pretty. It's based on the PO order line model, but we haven't actually defined the columns. So the next stage is to go back and handle that. So let's close that and go back to the code. So in the grid, we want to put all the columns. So let's grab the code I've already got, place it in here, and just to make you, I mean, this is all very repetitive, but each of these defines a column with a field saying which column it's coming from in the database or in the model, the text header, so that's what's going to appear at the top of the grid, and whether it's aligned left or right, and the width. The only other thing here is a couple of formats. N0 means it'll have comma separators in thousands and no decimal places. C2 means it's currency with 2 decimal places. P P2 means it's a percentage with 2 decimal places. And as you can see from this typing mistake, it doesn't seem to make any difference whether it's upper or lower case. So let's save that and run that and see what it looks like now. And now we've got our grid with product, description, quantity, unit price, net price, tax rate, tax, and total. But add, edit, and delete still don't do anything. So let's cancel that and go back and have a look at adding the dialog to add the individual purchase order lines. Now, as I say, this is my style of doing things. I don't say this is the right way, but what we're going to do is put a Syncfusion Dialog. It'll be modal, so that the user won't be able to click away outside the dialog box, so we've got more control over what the user does, and we'll have that pop up when they click the add button on the toolbar for the grid. So what we need to do now is, underneath the edit form, we want to put the code for a dialog, and I'm going to start off with a very basic one. I'm going to give it a reference, a model for changing the data, and a non-valid submit, and a close dialog. So this is very, very basic. And the code for that, we want to declare the actual dialog and the model as we did before for the others, but I have got code for this, so this may be partially less painful. So that'll define the dialog and the model, which is a new PO line. We also need to add code to handle the save order and cancel. And at this stage, they're going to be placeholders, but we'll add code later to make it actually do something. And we'll add that down at the bottom, the foot of the code section. Is this? So what that's saying is this order line save. If the PO line ID is equal to 0, which will only arise if it's a new purchase order line, we're going to save it here. Otherwise, we're going to be moving into the what happens if it's an editing, and then this is just going to close the dialog. Lastly, we need to add some code so that the actual dialog opens when the user clicks the add button. So we want something in here, and the code for that is here. So let's just drag that in here. So what that's going to do is it's going to create a new add order line, add edit order line object, and it's going to set some defaults, and then it's going to actually open the dialog. So the defaults is the net price is going to be 0, the tax ID is going to be 0, and the product ID is going to be 0. And again, we've got no problems, so let's just save that and run it. So here's our grid. I click add, and lo and behold, add order line dialog opens. Doesn't do much. I can cancel it, which will close it, which is fine. Okay, let's close this and go back to the code. You'll probably notice that I'm taking a very cautious approach here. I'd like to do things step by step, get each little bit working, and then know that I'm safe to move on to the next bit. And the next task is to add the controls to the dialog. and we're going to start with the drop-down list to allow the user to select a product. The controls that rely on product selection are the product description and unit price, so we'll add those as well. Once the user has selected a product, we will derive the description and the unit price and populate the relevant text box and numeric text box. So what we need to do is in the edit form section of the dialog, so dialog, so in here, so that's in the SF dialog, and I've put data annotations validator in there. It'll do some very basic checking, but we need to flesh that out a little bit later. We're going to use a data source of product, and we're going to have an on value select event of on change product, so we need to define that as well. I'll come back to that in a second, but first of all we need to define the data source, the product. So let's do that, and I'll come back and explain a little bit more about this. So first of all, we need to inject the product service because we're going to have a drop-down list of products. So let's put that up here. We're going to have an IEnumerable of products from the product service. So in the same way we've got for supplier, we'll have the same for products. And then in the on initialize, we want to produce a list of products, which is going to just await the product service and get a product list. This again we may come back to a little bit later. So that's those, and now we want the on value select. So we'll add that down at the bottom. So there's the on change product, and you'll see here I've used select event args, which is a departure from what we did originally for the supplier. So somewhere on here we'll have the supplier selection. Where is it? I can't see it. Right, here we are. On change supplier, we had change event args. Now we've got select event args. I had terrible problems with the dialog. It would work some of the time, but not all the time, and I ended up getting problems with null values where I couldn't really see why on earth they were getting produced. So as part of the solution, I changed from change event args to select event args, and that was part of the solution. Right, so let's explain what's happening here. When the user selects a product from the drop-down list of products, it's going to change or update the add edit order line object so that the PO line product code is set to the item selected from the drop-down list, the same for the description and the same for the unit price. So that's what that bit does. Now back up at the top in here, we've got the drop-down list. It's got product, the T item is product, the T value is int, the text is product ID because that's the item that's the key to the product table, and we're going to bind it to the PO line product ID. It's got a float label saying we always want to see it. It's going to have a select a product as the placeholder, and it's going to be enabled true. And these are the drop-down field settings. So it's going to say we're going to show the product code, and the value is going to be the product ID. And this is the event. We're going to, on the value select, and it's going to be the product, and the t value is ID. Sorry, the t value is int. This is going to be the description. That's the text box to display the description. You'll see it's enabled, so the user is going to be able to change it. And the same for the numeric text box. For the unit price, that's enabled, so if the user wants to change the unit price, they can. The spin button I've taken away, so you haven't got the kind of up and down arrows to increase or decrease in amount. The format is currency 2, and enable RTL means it's going to be right aligned, but I think that actually means enable right to left data insert. I'm not completely happy about this, but at least it puts it on the right hand side of the, it right aligns it. Okay, so let's run that and check it works. And we can select product. We can edit the product if we want to, and we've got a unit price. This is what I mean about it not being great. If I want to change that, I have to highlight over it and type a different price. But anyway, we'll maybe come back to that a little bit later. Save doesn't do anything still, but I can cancel it. Fine, so far so good. Let's go back and add a few more of the items in the dialog. As well as the product, we're also going to have a drop-down box for tax, for the tax rate. So let me see if I've got that. Yes, it's this. So if I drag that in here. So we've now got a drop-down list for the tax rate, and this mimics exactly the same as we've got for product. So need to define the tax, and we've got an on value select as well, and another text box for the tax rate. You'll see here though that enabled is set to false. I'm not going to allow the user to change the tax rate. I think that's sensible. We don't want the users changing tax rates at random. Fine, so okay, so let's set about defining that. For the tax, again, we need to inject the tax service. We need to add an IEnumerable for the tax. And we need to add a tax here. Have I got that? Doesn't look like I have. Okay, let's type that. Shouldn't be too difficult. So that should sort that out. But now we want to add the on value select. So we'll add that down at the bottom, and hopefully I've got some code ready for that. So what's going to happen is when the user selects a tax rate, it's going to update the I don't think that should be test. I think that should be add edit order line. No, I'm just defining that. No, that's not sure I need that. I'm just going to comment that out for the moment. Right, let's save that and run it. So we've got the dialog with product, and we can now select a tax rate, and it defaults the tax rate percentage. So that looks good. Okay, let's cancel that. Go back to the code and fill in a few more of the missing parts. And the other fields we need to add to the dialog are quantity, the net price, which is quantity times unit price, the tax, which is net price times the tax rate, and the total, which is net price plus the tax, or that could also be described as the net price times 1 plus the tax rate. So we'll add these numeric text boxes and then do some calculations. So we want where are we? Here we are. We want quantity, and we want to put that immediately after the product description. So it's a numeric text box, it's enabled quantity, and we've got on focus out as the event, and it's going to calculate the PO line, or it's going to carry out a PO line calculations. We'll come to that in a second. Now we want the unit price, and that, sorry, we want the net price, and that goes immediately after the unit price. So that's the net price. That's not enabled because that's going to be the result of a calculation, so we don't want anyone messing with that. We want the tax amount and the total price, and we want that to go after the tax rate. So here we have the tax amount. Again, that's not enabled because we don't want people messing around with that. And the same for the total price. Right, now we've also got this PO line calc. And what we want to happen there is that when the user leaves the quantity, we want the calculation to take place. So let's put the function to carry that, or the method to carry that out, down at the bottom. And that's going to do a calculation for PO line net price, which is going to be the unit price times the quantity. The tax amount is going to be the net price times the tax rate, and the gross price is the net price times 1 plus the tax rate. The other peculiarities, I'll say peculiarities, I'm not quite sure whether it's peculiar or not, but what I also found is that you'll see here for the net price, I've just got PO line product unit price times whatever. Here I had to put dot value in. Again, not entirely sure why, but it works, is my get out there. So that's the calculation. But we need to make sure that the calculation takes place as well if the user also changes the product, and by implication changing the unit price, or the tax rate. And to do this, we're going to add the PO line calc to both the on-change product and on-change tax methods. So on-change product, I'm just going to put in here PO line calc. and down here on the tax. Right, so let's see if that works. I'll save it and run it. So here's our dialog. We can select product and enter a quantity, price. We can enter a so it then calculates the net price, which is, maybe if I did that 1, you can see what's happening. Make it 10. And we can select tax rate. So that has the tax amount, total price and tax rate. I think I need to sort that out. I want tax rate immediately after the drop-down box, not down at the bottom. But anyway, let's sort that out. So cancel that, close, and back to the code. And stop the code. And what I got was things in the wrong place. I wanted tax rate immediately after the tax ID. I think I've lost one of those somewhere. Right, one more go. Ah, no, that's what happened to it. Seem to have made a real mess of this. Let's run it and see what happens. Right, that looks more like it. We've got things appearing in the right order. It still doesn't look very nice, and we'll do something about that to make it look a little bit nicer. So back to the code again and stop it running. And we're going to use some CSS now to straighten this out. In the same way that we had this grid container, and really from the same source, we've got this thing called flex container. And the flex container sets things out so that they flow across a row. So the tab sequence, by setting it to row, goes along the row and then onto the following line. And then justify content will space things equally between the right margins. And I can give it a margin, I can give a column gap. So what I need to do now is use that and place things within those divs. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to have product, the drop down, on the top line. I'm going to have the description on the second line, and then I want quantity, unit price and net price to be on the same row. Then tax, tax rate and tax amount on their own row, and total price on its own row. So to do that, what I need to do is, before product, div there, sometimes this aligns and sometimes it doesn't. So that's put the product on its own row, the product description on its own row, and now I want the 3 next items on their own row. So unit price, net price. No, I don't. I want I can hear everyone screaming at me saying, no, not there. I'll get it right eventually. So 1, 2, 3 after the unit price. So tax, tax rate, tax amount. And lastly, 1 for the total. Right, I have no idea whether that's right or not. Only one way to find out. Run it. Right, let's have a look. I think this is how I intended it to look. Yes, that makes sense. We've got the product description, quantity, unit price, net price, tax rate, percentage tax rate, and the tax amount, and the total price. So you'll see all these down here add up easily. We've still got that to deal with, so let's have a look at that. So for this, we need to wire up the save button on the order line save method. So if we scroll down, order line save. So what we need to do is put in here what we want to happen when we click the save button. And this is this. It looks fairly hairy, but what we want to do is add a new order line, because we've got this, we're currently using a model called add edit order line. We want to add it to order lines. We want to add a new one where we set all these values. So the line header ID is 0. We don't know the header ID yet, and then we'll set the product ID, the product code, the description, quantity, unit price, net price, tax rate, tax amount, and gross price. Then we want to refresh the grid, which is the purchase order lines grid, and then we have status changed. Now what I've found is that this is absolutely necessary. You need to have that in there, otherwise things go haywire. And I was expecting to be able to then just add edit order line equals new PO line. And that's where I ran into horrendous problems. The way I've solved it, and I'm not entirely happy with this, is just to reset all the values on the dialog to effectively blanks or zeros, and that seems to work. The other way I could have done it would have been to have closed the dialog at this point, and I'm sure that would have been okay. But I didn't want to have to make the user click add new line every time they wanted to add a new purchase order line. In most cases, when you're entering order, you'll probably have 3 or 4 lines and you just want to rattle them in one after another. You don't want to have to keep on going back to the grid, clicking add a new line, entering it, saving it, back to the grid, add a new line, and so on. So this is how I've achieved what I want to achieve. I'm not entirely happy with it, as I say, but I think it works. So let's save everything and run it. I'll click add new purchase order. Now I've been just rushing down here, but let's add a supplier up here. And I'm not logged in, but let's overlook that for the moment. Add, select product, and then when I save it, in the background here, we've got that added to the purchase order lines, and I'm ready to add a new item again. So let's have 20 of those. And I could carry on adding. A couple of things here that I think we can improve upon. I've selected a supplier here, but I'm getting a list of all the products, not just the products for that supplier. I think we might look at that later on. And there might be 1 or 2 other things we need to look at as well. But if I now save this, we've now got the new order saved. We need to tidy this up as well. We need to put some bit more information on here, such as who the supplier was and what the order total is and things like that. And the other thing is on here, edit and delete, don't do anything. So we might like to think about what we want to do with that. But I think for the moment, that's about as far as I want to go in this video. We also haven't added proper data validation to the order lines, so we need to think about that. But that'll be in the next video in this series. Thank you very much for watching. The code and description for all this, I'll put a link in the description where you can find a link to the Blazor code website, where I've got all the details. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully it won't be too long before the next video. Apologies for the rather long gap between the previous one and this one, but I did have some problems and I hopefully have now sorted them out. Thank you.